Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to welcome you to Future Founders Fest 2025. We're going to give folks just a couple of seconds to come in from the waiting room. Sometimes it does take a couple minutes after we go live for folks to get through. So you are in the right place. Very excited to get started with you very shortly. And thank you in advance for your attention and your energy over the course of the next hour. Um, my name is Brinton, and I'm with the team Handshake, and I am so excited to be leading this session today. Looks like we should have a good amount of folks who've come in from that waiting room, so I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen share and start to look at my panelists in the eyes. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I do want to get us started with some quick housekeeping notes before we get into our session today. I want to thank everyone on behalf of myself and Handshake and Base10 partners for being here. We will have about 45 minutes of prepared discussion today with our fabulous panelists, and we're going to save about 10 minutes at the end for questions from you, the audience. So please feel free. You should see a Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to place any questions in that Q&A box throughout the session, and we will do our best to get to some of them before we wrap today. As a heads up, you won't see others' questions until we mark them as answered, so please don't think we're ignoring you if you submit a question and we don't get to it right away. I also want to share that we are recording this event and we will be sharing it tomorrow morning with all registrants. So don't worry about if you miss something, if you have to drop at any point to go to class or take a final, we've got you covered. Don't worry, we are recording and you will receive the recording in your inbox tomorrow morning. Thank you so much for your time and energy today. And with that, let's get into it. I am super excited to be with you all for Future Founders Fest 2025, where we are talking all things entrepreneurship, startup careers, and finding your perfect career fit. Big shout out to the Base10 Partners team for making this happen in collaboration with Handshake. And I want to make sure that everybody is really comfortable with that Q&A box. So just to get it started right now, let us know in the Q&A, are you more interested in starting your own company or landing a startup job, or maybe kind of flirting with the idea of both? Let us know in the Q&A box, and we'll just make sure that that is working here. Today, as I mentioned, you can expect a mix of expert advice, some real talk about startup life, and that Q&A. So let's get into it. I would love to introduce you to today's panelist. Maryam, I would love to start with you. Do you mind sharing a little bit about yourself, maybe explaining your background a little bit and explaining your job like you would maybe to your parents or to a fifth grader?
Definitely super excited to be here. Can everyone hear me? Brinton, can you hear me good? Awesome. I have a
Sounds
little
great.
bit of throat today, so bear with me. So I'm the CEO of Axle. Axle is a software company that helps other companies that have fleets like delivery, rideshare, construction, get access to all the vendors and the processes they need to manage modern vehicles like electric and autonomous vehicles. It's a bit of a weird space to land in, so I'll give some context. About 7.5 years ago, I managed the fleet at Amazon, so the blue delivery vans that we now kind of see everywhere. So I managed that program in the very early days of the program, and through that, learned a lot about the massive world of fleet management. It's a very invisible industry that you don't really know until you know, until you're in the space. But it's basically the world of vendors and processes that are built around taking care of trucks and vans and buses. And built that program at Amazon for gas and diesel. When we launched EVs and AVs in our fleet, we were like, wait, nobody in the industry knows how to handle EVs and AVs. They're so different from traditional gas and diesel vehicles. So that really was the origin story of where Axle started. So our platform does things like introduce fleets to repair and maintenance, insurance, warranty, and all of that good stuff.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for that overview. I'm going to go in alphabetical order. Shivani, can you give us a little bit of background on you and what you do today?
Yeah, of course. I'm Shivani. I help run our university recruiting and programs at Notion. For those of you who don't know what Notion is, maybe just a quick little blurb. But basically allowing folks to utilize a flexible tool to adapt to your own needs. We kind of call it Lego blocks. So you are building your own Lego structure within our project management and database. We just started our internship program 2 to 3 years ago. So we are relatively new, but excited to just get more folks earlier career in the door at Notion.
Beautiful. And last but not least, Zach, can you introduce yourself?
Awesome. Totally will do. I'm Zach, one of the co-founders here at Clasp, and I'll try and do a decent job here because I'm pretty sure my parents still don't know what I do. But essentially what Clasp does is I think we take away all the paperwork when it comes to all of the back office health insurance items. So pretty, again, sort of like Maryam mentioned, abstracted away from general members of society, but for brokers in the space, they, you know, use paper so much back and forth when it comes to all of their processes. And, we just do away with that when it comes to automation. And that's probably the simplest way I can describe it. Originally Canadian, now in the US, happy to be helping, this US centric problem in a sense. But that's me.
Beautiful. Well, thank you all so much for being here to share your experiences and expertise with us. We're going to go through a couple of different structured sections here. I would love to start talking about finding your product market fit as a future founder with Maryam. So let's get started there. You have built a company that is tackling a huge challenge in transportation, as you mentioned. And I know that so many students here, especially based on that Q&A that we're seeing, are thinking about launching a startup someday. So let's start with this question. When you were a student and you were thinking about your future, did you know that you wanted to be a founder, or was there a specific moment that encouraged you to take the leap?
Honestly, no. I did not, as a student, at all think that I would ever start a company. And the reason I think a lot of that is my father actually was a small business owner. Everyone in my family has been a small business owner. He actually sold solar panels and batteries out of our basement. My first job was at like an expo, and I was really kind of drawn to seeing all the craziness around small businesses. I was like, when I was in college, I was like, I want to work in a big company and get a good job and get a good title and get health insurance and pay and have something that's very structured. But I do look back now, and I was always very drawn to entrepreneurial things in college. So, I started a club in college that ended up being a pretty big club, which are small things, right? I was a donations recruiter for the alumni office. I was a tour guide, I did tour guides for like 4 years. So all things that kind of got me in front of people, meeting new people, putting myself out there, which is not entrepreneurship, but it kind of flexes a lot of similar muscles. But the light bulb moment for Axel actually came much, much later in my life, when I was at Amazon, consistently going through problems almost every day and being like, someone should really solve this problem, or I wonder who's going to solve this problem. And then 3 years later saying, wait, no one is solving this problem that I've been complaining about. Why not try to solve this problem and see if I can do it? So that was really the moment that I took the leap. But no, in college, did not at all have that inclination.
I love that there were those breadcrumbs though, that now looking back, you realize that you had that instinct, that entrepreneurial instinct. And I think a lot of students have ideas and, are seeing problems that they want to have solved, to your point. But turning that idea into something real and into a company is the hardest part. Do you have any advice for students who have an idea but aren't sure where to get started in kind of actualizing that experience?
That's such a good question. And I think a very critical aspect of it is start as tiny as you possibly can. Like start so small that it's almost laughable. It just pick the smallest version of the idea that you can test. You don't need to, go big. You don't need to start getting money in the door on day one. The smaller the idea as you start building it, the better. I also think, this is an advantage can be building around a pain that you personally felt. So when you personally feel something as a pain point, that's usually a sign that there's something there. But of course, then your job at that time is to say, are other people also feeling this pain? And if you want to start a business that's a for-profit business, will people actually pay you for solving that pain? And so that's really what you're trying to validate. So talking to people and listening a lot. I think one of the most underrated skills early on is talking to as many people as you can, other students, peers, alums, folks that you can cold email and reach out to, talk to people and be like, are you experiencing this problem? And a lot of people are very, very nice. And so people will not want to hurt your feelings. So they'll be like, yeah, that's a great idea. But really test, are they working on workarounds for that problem that you're asking them about? Are they willing to pay for a solution? Like what the simplest solution that you build? And then make a very scrappy prototype or sketch. Start really, really tiny. There's a lot of amazing free tools out there now to do something. But you can also do things by hand. If, for example, you want to start, let's say, like a tutoring platform, match people. You don't need like tech to do that. Start matching people, seeing if there's something there. But I think one final thing I would say is that's all really well and good for the idea. Start small, be scrappy, test it as many ways you can, talk to as many people. But there's also a lot of, I think, value in doing more entrepreneurial things, like start a newsletter. If your idea is eventually going to be community or content based, that flexes a really powerful muscle. Organize things, just do things that are helping you, rally people around something, because that really is the seed of a lot of entrepreneurial things as well. So you don't even necessarily need to have an idea. Just doing more of those entrepreneurial things can often lead to that even happening.
Thank you for that. And as you were talking about starting small and building something, I was thinking of Shivani mentioning that Notion is all about like it's kind of like Lego blocks that allow you to kind of start small and build something from scratch. So that could be a good place to start as well. And I really appreciate you touching on skills, because I know that that's going to be something we circle back to. I know we get a lot of questions from students in the Q&A, so maybe I'll bookmark that for later. But one of the biggest reasons that startups fail is because they don't find that product market fit. And you were talking about understanding people's pain points, understanding what people are able to pay for to solve those pain points. So, not finding your product market fit means building something that people don't actually want or need. How did you approach validating your idea for Axel? And, what signs told you that you were on the right track when you were getting started?
I think I've said this earlier. One of the best things is to experience a problem yourself. And so just by virtue of the space I was in and the work I was doing, I experienced basically the pain points that led to the creation of Axel. So fleet management for modern vehicles like electric and autonomous vehicles was really hard, and we hit roadblocks all the time. So in a weird way, the best person to start building for is yourself. If you can solve a problem for yourself, that can be great. But I think that also brings us to like the value of working in jobs or having experiences that are not necessarily startup driven, because then you can be in a complex space and be like, whoa, this is full of problems that no one is solving. And maybe I can learn enough about this problem, this space, to go solve that problem. And the second thing, I think what we did a lot of, and I continue to do, it's probably the thing I do the most even now, is talk to as many people within the industry, and talk in a way that I'm not trying to see if they like me or they want to give me a thumbs up on the idea, but are their eyes lighting up? Are they sitting on the edge of their seat? Are they saying, wait, tell me more? Or when we sell them something, they're like, how quickly can this go to this other problem? Or can you build this? So really looking for that kind of level of demand. And very early on, one of the ways we did that was we spent a ton of time with potential customers. I would ask shops and fleet shops if I could like hang out with them for the day, and they'd be like, sure, we don't really want you here, but fine. Like if you're going to be quiet in a corner, I just wanted to see them work. Even though I was coming from the space, like there was aspects of space that I wasn't super familiar with, ultimately, like I saw the pain point from one angle, not from all the different angles. Spending time at conferences, I went to a lot of conferences and like all over the country, which was awesome. I got to see parts of the country I never thought I would see, and go to these like fleet conferences where, a lot of people were getting together to talk about their problems. And within those problems, really just spending time listening and not going out with a strong sense of what problem I wanted to solve, but like, what are the problems that folks are speaking about as much as possible. So it's still, we're still iterating. Product market fit is a quest. I think it's something that you get and then you keep working towards because you have to keep it. So that quest isn't really over, I guess, forever, but I think a big part of it is just listening, talking, and becoming very obsessed with the problem, not necessarily your solution for it.
I love that takeaway. And it sounds, I know you mentioned that communication and listening are such key skills for a founder. It really seems like that has been true of your entire experience, having those conversations and validating your idea. So thank you for sharing. And I think we'll probably circle back to some of those critical skills a little bit later in our time today. But for now, I'd love to pivot over to talking to Shivani about finding your candidate market fit as somebody who's thinking about finding a job in a startup environment. recruitment. Shivani, I know a lot of students here are applying for internships or full-time jobs. What's the biggest mistake that you see candidates make when trying to land a role at a high-growth startup like Notion?
Yeah. I would say like to set the scene, resumes are usually a really big factor in allowing recruiters to understand like your past experience, what you've been working on. Um, Especially as internships and new grad roles get a bunch of applications. So that's kind of the first introduction we get. For me, I'm holistically looking at everything. I look at school, majors, clubs, leadership roles. But of course, the main thing we are looking for is the projects and the previous experience that you have had. And one thing that I've seen most people sometimes don't include is the impact that they've had with those projects and with those experiences. I'm looking for things that you've been able to own end to end. What type of impact are you making? Was this something that was on the roadmap and you took the initiative to go ahead and figure out a way to get this feature built or get this backend migrated or anything like that? And so I think that is a huge, huge plus if you're able to put that into tangible metrics and words and put that on a resume. Especially because if I've never met you, again, the resume is the number one way for me to understand what you've been working on. Adding a cover letter would be helpful too. Again, if there's maybe the resume doesn't have enough space for everything, but being able to highlight that and especially that impact is very important. And I would say leaving that out could be the difference between that initial call or maybe an apply next time email.
That's such great insight. I definitely, one of the things that I like to share with students, because I do talk to students quite a bit, is if you can find a way to quantify your impact and turn that into numbers, that's a really killer thing to include on your resume. And it helps make it skimmable for folks like you who are seeing so many different resumes every single day, especially during peak recruitment season. So thank you for sharing that. And, startups move fast. And so they want to make sure that candidates can keep up. If a student doesn't have direct startup experience already under their belt, as you mentioned, personal projects, class projects, things like that, how can they make their application competitive, even if they haven't had directly applicable startup experience?
Yeah, honestly, adding on to that first question, the projects, the clubs, I would say like extracurricular activities that they are a part of also tell a tale in how they would adapt to a high pay startup environment. For us, I would say most early career recruiters, because again, not everyone has that like cookie cutter background. Everyone is different, and that's kind of what you want at your company anyway. You're kind of looking for the different classes they've taken. We are pretty well versed in knowing what classes are like mandatory versus optional versus like the really difficult ones. Same with the different clubs and organizations on different types of campuses. We're pretty well versed in knowing what those entail and like kind of how deep they go based on campus as well. We know like what schools are known for like robotics versus electrical engineering versus software engineering. And I would say all of them have a place in a startup realm. So really just being able to tell your story in that resume. You definitely don't need tech experience because you could be the most amazing coder and we would never know unless you put that on your resume. The other thing I will definitely highlight is let's say you have a couple of dream companies you want to work for, getting just more like introduction and understanding of what type of languages and frameworks they use, especially if you're looking for like a software engineering internship, and just getting experience in it. For Notion, we use TypeScript and React, and I would say historically most folks have done better if they have those kind of skill sets in their back pocket. Not saying you won't get an internship because we have plenty of folks that are able to learn on the fly and do it during the internship. But again, that learning curve once you're here for the internship is just that much quicker and you're able to adapt a lot more faster.
Thank you. And going off script a little bit, do you have any advice for students who maybe have that dream company or that dream internship to do that initial research into really how they can prepare themselves as they're thinking about the application process?
Yeah, great question. I would say two things. One, most hopefully job descriptions tell you exactly what languages and frameworks they are using. So definitely just like kind of do the research there. If you see like internship positions, new grad positions, or even just full-time roles, it'll be listed there. And then the second thing is, which I think we'll talk a little bit more about later, is that cold outreach. Even just like a simple email of like, hey, I would love to work at your company one day. Would love to just get more insight on like maybe skill sets you would recommend I brush up on or that you currently use there that could help me in my long-term strategy of eventually applying.
Thank you for that. Okay, and I'd like to circle back. I know we're talking about candidate market fit, just like we talked about previously, where startups have to find their product market fit. Job seekers really need to find their candidate market fit. So they need to show why they're the right hire for a fast-moving startup. What is the best way for students and recent grads to demonstrate that they're a strong fit, even if they don't have that traditional tech background?
Yeah, I hopefully this answers the way that I like usually have recruiter calls or prep calls when I'm having folks go through the process. Two things that I basically always point out, regardless of background. One, of course, is just like your preparation for the interview you're going to be doing. Yes, we look at technical skills, and so tying in that understanding what those languages and frameworks are. I would say Notion is very upfront about what those we have like interview guides that are public facing documents. Everyone knows what the process looks like here. So you could be in theory hopefully prepping for a while before you do those calls. But the second piece of it is those soft skills, the communication, the collaboration. How do you take feedback during your interview and then integrate that into the interview itself? It's a huge, I would say, indicator for us because it gives us an understanding of what you would be like to work with if you were to join full time, whether it be an internship or like post, maybe even getting an internship conversion offer. And I think that really indicates whether you'll be a strong fit or not. Notion is a very collaborative environment, very communicative. It's very much like a flat structure where it's like everyone has good ideas and how do we implement them into our day to day and into our product. And honestly, I would say most, at least what I've been seeing is most companies think like that as well, and especially in the startup space, because again, more thoughts and more like brain power really does just drive that product and make it get to that end goal quicker. And so yeah, I would say those two skill sets, of course, your technical abilities, which you can learn on the job as well, but those soft skills really play a big part.
I love hearing that soft skills are a thing that have been present in both of our answers so far. And I think we'll circle back to some of that a little bit later. But thank you so much for sharing that insight. And I think really a big takeaway is showing your impact across the board in your resume and application materials, demonstrating that initiative and your thought process and your ability to collaborate. So if anyone is taking notes, which I'm sure people are, those are some really good things to highlight. Thank you, Shivani. Okay, awesome. Zach, I'd love to pivot over to you to talk about founder market fit and lessons that you have learned. You're the co-founder, president, and CPO at Clasp, and you made that jump into entrepreneurship, which can feel both exciting, but also, I imagine, terrifying. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I envision that that's pretty scary. What was the biggest challenge that you faced when starting your company?
Yeah, it's definitely a good question, and there's definitely new challenges that pop up every single day. But I'd say one of the biggest ones, and really a learning for me, is just learning how much you have to stretch, especially in the early days, into roles that you might have previously honestly underestimated. If you asked me like 3 years ago, and I had a magic wand to pick any skills I wanted, I would have probably said something along the lines of product building or design or sales or something like that. You ask me today, and I am week over week trying to learn everything I can about recruiting. I'm spending time with great recruiters, trying to absorb and think and operate in that field. And it's been really a challenging area, but also a fun challenge to stretch into those given areas. And I think it's really also given me a deep appreciation of every function within a company that makes the whole thing run. When you're a team of 10, everyone has to do a bit of everything, wear many hats, as they say. And I think for folks who are maybe looking at a startup job or looking to jump into entrepreneurship, it's a good reminder that like all skills are relevant at a startup. So I wouldn't undermine any previous experience that you previously had, because more likely than not, it'll come into use. And I think a funny one was I used to install, was it fire alarms in buildings, and I actually just installed a TV in our building or in our office yesterday. So, even those skills come into use.
That's such a good note. And I have to say, the ability to wear many hats is something that, Handshake has several hundred employees now, and I've been here for, quite a few years, but the ability to just kind of change what you're focused on and fit into areas where you're needed is such a critical one, and definitely helps people stand out as folks that you want to invest in on your team. So that's a really great note. And I'd love to, something that I've heard about founding a startup is that it isn't so much about the product, but about resilience. If somebody here is considering starting a company, but isn't sure that they're ready yet to be a founder, what would your advice be for them?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just understanding that, like, even in the most, at least in my opinion, in the most optimal scenario, you'll probably never feel 100% ready. I think there's still things day to day that, I go through, my co-founder goes through that, you won't be 100% ready for by any means. So I think my general advice would be to not take the leap when you have the perfect answer, when you are 110% sure, but on the problem you're trying to solve, but really having a hypothesis and being confident that you actually want to go out there and solve this given problem, not that you have the answer for it. I think, setbacks, uncertainty, it's really part of the journey. And I think what really matters is just that you want to ensure that you want to be a part of that solution and that you're truly interested in that given problem set in that problem space. So, ask yourself if you want to be doing this in 10 years, 5 years, 10 years type of thing. And also ask yourself if the people around you are the people that you want to be doing this with for a long, long time. And I think those are some of the important considerations that came to mind for me when answering that question.
Thank you. And I know we have a little bit later, I'm going to pick your brain about how you find those people. And I'm interested in hearing from all three of you about that. So bookmark that for a little bit later. But we heard Maryam earlier talk about product market fit. And it's also really important to find that founder market fit. So not just building the right product, but being the right person to build it. And how did you know that you were the right co-founder for Clasp? What advice would you have for students who are figuring out if they should take that path?
Yeah, totally. And I might just flip this question a bit, just because I definitely believe in founder, market fit. But to me, it's a bit less about having one-to-one exact background or skill set for the space, but more so around a founder's curiosity for the space and really willing to go deep in the market that they're building in. I think when you're evaluating founder market fit, don't just look at your resume, but like really look at your interests when it comes to the given space. Ask yourself, why this space, why now, and then really consider how your previous experiences, even if it's not directly correlated, line up and transfer to this new context. I was lucky enough to be pretty early with the Shopify team, and just looking at the way that they hired, we had product managers who were grandmasters of chess and no prior experience, and engineers who were professional esports athletes. And I think there's so many different things that translate over to what you can do in that new role. And I truly believe that curiosity and passion for the space and the problem set, at least to me, overrides some of the hard skills that you can always learn on the job as we move forward.
And that's something that Shivani shared too, is just like building those hard skills on the job and kind of adapting to the role when you're actually there. It's so interesting to hear these kind of common threads through all three of your answers, which is a perfect segue, I think, into bringing the whole group together to get into more of a speed round with everybody. Thank you all for going a little bit more in depth with me about your specific areas. I know I learned a ton, and our audience did too. But now I want to get into some quick hot takes, maybe a little speed round. So I guess if you could each try to give us your answer to the following questions in like 30 seconds to a minute, that would be awesome. And first one, and I'll go in reverse order here. What's one misconception about startups and startup life that you wish more people knew? Zach, I'd love to hear your answer first.
Yeah, I think my biggest one is just that everything has to be tech oriented. Like, hey, if you're not a tech startup, you're not a startup, which completely isn't true. And even within the space, having everything be so capital, intensive when it comes to the point of view of what drives success, it plays a role into the startups ecosystem, but I think sometimes folks focus a bit too much on it. And, the one unfortunate thing is that I feel like it really leads incredibly talented people to think that they don't have founder market fit or fit to be a startup founder, which is totally incorrect. And I think, that type of thinking sometimes pushes people to avoid starting a business in an area that they're truly passionate about. So I think that's what, at least for me, one of the biggest misconceptions.
That's a really interesting one. Thank you. Shivani, how about you? What's a myth that you would want to bust about startup life?
Yeah. For me, I definitely think it's that there's no work-life balance. There is. Being vocal about your boundaries is really important. And honestly, just no one's going to get mad at you for that. No one expects you to work 20-hour days or anything like that. And so again, just having those convos early on. And of course, there may be some long days, but just knowing that that is not always going to be the case. And as long as you have those boundaries in place, your manager, your team, everyone will respect that.
Thank you. I have to agree from the startup employee perspective for sure. Maryam, I would love to hear your thoughts. Any misconceptions that you would like to address about startup life?
Yeah, I think one big one is that you need to go to a big company first to get polished and to get best practices. I think some startups particularly have built some of the best practices across the industry. And I think there's a misconception that you can't get that experience. Zach mentioned wearing multiple hats, doing different things. You write the comms plan, you work on HR, you go talk to customers, you really do so many different things that it can really be, I would say, like a place where you can build and set excellent best practices and learn from each other. So I really push back against this misconception that you first need to get all the polish and best practice from a big company. I think in small companies, you can definitely have that. And what's better, you can have a big role in building that and building the kind of best practices you want.
Absolutely. That's such a good note. You can wear these different hats and you can also have more of a fundamental impact with your work at an earlier phase. So that's a really good one. Okay, I would like to, Zach, you mentioned wanting to find people that you could see yourself spending a long time with. And that is a really good segue into our next question, which is, what's the best advice that you've received about finding the right co-founders? Maryam, I'm actually going to bring this to you first, and then we can pivot over to Zach. But I would love to hear your tips for finding the right folks for your startup.
I'm going to steal from Zach, but I think it's so critical to have folks that you really like spending time with. In a startup, you're going to spend an inordinate amount of time with the people you're working with. And it really matters. I know it sounds silly and cliched, but it matters that you like and trust each other, that you assume best intent for the other person, that's like kind of speaking and talking, and sometimes you're going to make hard decisions together, and there's tough times in startups, and so people that you want to be on that journey with, that you like being around, that you like spending time with, that when you're stuck, I know that stuck at the airport, 6 hours delays, that you're having a good time. I think that's really critical, and everything else you can build, but you can't build that. So people that you trust and like is really critical.
Yeah, it sounds like you've got some lived experience there with being delayed at an airport for 6 hours. That's a really good note. Zach, I want to pose the same question to you. I'd love to hear your advice for finding those co-founders, those early startup hires.
Yeah, totally. And I think my feedback is very much the same, which is, you want to find people who not only you can be friends with, but you share core values with, and that you have similar long-term goals when it comes to what you want to achieve, what you want to do with the business, and maybe even life overall. And I think finding someone whose success you actually genuinely care about. I think especially when it comes to startups, like the spotlight will be on different people at different times. You want to ensure that you want to be rooting for your co-founder and vice versa when they get the spotlight and when you are successful, and that you're there for them when, you're in the downtime, so let's call it of a startup. And I think, the journey will be long. You hear about startups always pivoting to different markets, different areas. But you really want to make sure the baseline and the bedrock of the company is always solid. And to me, that really, hinges partly on the co-founders' relationships and the values that hinges on.
Thank you so much for that. And we've gotten some follow-up questions that I know we'll get to in the Q&A. But first, Shivani, since you're on the recruitment side of things, I'd love to hear if you have any favorite pieces of advice from the recruitment perspective of finding the right early team members in a startup like Notion.
Yeah, I would say the best piece of advice I've gotten when trying to find these folks is that there's no one size fits all. And I touched on that a little earlier. It's that everyone really does bring their unique like perspective, unique background, technical skills. And a varied background is good because that just drives the product further because we have so many different viewpoints on it. Good to think outside of the box rather than look for the same thing. And again, just expands that knowledge base. I feel like especially as we shift into more of that like AI first mindset, and especially with tech companies, and especially at Notion as well, the folks that are in school now and are starting out looking for their new jobs historically have that mindset regardless of background. So it's been fun to see that shift, but also hire them as well.
Thank you for that. Okay, a question that I receive all the time from students, and just a big hairy beast of a concept is networking. This is something that I feel like is very intimidating, but it sounds like connections are so important for finding the right people in your startup, finding the right people to build your business with. Shivani, I'll start with you, but do you have any advice for students who feel like they don't have any professional connections yet? Where should they start?
Yeah, honestly, you can start anywhere, like LinkedIn, your career fairs, events like this, conferences. It's really about putting yourself out there and just, especially if you're earlier in your career and like you said, you don't have those connections, getting introduced to new people, new companies, um, whoever can help you along the way. Personally, anytime someone reaches out to me, that maybe I like have like a connection of a connection or I've heard about or someone introduces me, I'm more than happy to hop on a call just to understand what they're looking for and give them advice or help with whatever it is they need. And I did that exact thing when I was in college, so I'm more than happy to pay it forward now. But yeah, I think one cold email could turn into an offer. You never know, so there's no harm in trying.
I love that attitude. Maryam, I'd love to hear from you about your advice for students who feel like maybe they don't have any professional connections yet.
I think honestly, cold outreach is your best friend. Events like these are your best friends. I think 90% of the time, maybe 90% is too strong. That's no, no, let me not put a percentage out there. But I think a lot of the time when you reach out to someone and you say, hey, I'm really interested in what you're working on, would love to chat and learn more. Many people would be very happy to hop on the phone and chat and tell more. And you never know where those conversations go. I've had so many conversations in my career that someone made a referral or I reached out to someone and next thing I know, this conversation was taking a completely random direction. And we actually hired someone through like a cold outreach. And so I think those kind of things are really important to do. It's hard to put yourself out there, but as long as you do it, I think with you're on time, you do it well. I think that's exactly what you should be doing. You should be bold and reaching out to people and setting up time because people are very happy to most of the time to give you time.
Thank you for that. Okay, Zach, last but not least, what would your advice be for somebody who's feeling intimidated by networking and maybe not having any professional connections?
Yeah, I think it's probably a double echo of just like cold reaching out is the way to go. I actually did a quick scan of my reach outs from the last month. I have 90 unread reach outs. So it's also completely fine for people to not respond and for you to keep on going, which I think is, pretty important to do as well. And, I think like as students, you can definitely play the student card, which is really huge. I can't do that, unfortunately. And then really honest, finding ways to be helpful in return, even if it's small, I think would be great and important. And really seeing this as like a mini network effect. You never know who that person can or will introduce you to, and just like keep on doing it because you will get ignored. I think that's the reality of it, but persistence is key when it comes to this one.
Yeah, that's great. I think the resilience and knowing that it takes the one yes is really important. And I love that you're still doing cold outreach to this day. I think that shows that it's a lifelong skill. Thank you all for those rapid fire answers. I'd love to spend some time getting into our audience Q&A because we have received a ton of great questions from the audience. And so I want to get to as many as we can before we wrap up today. And one that just came in that maybe is relevant to all three of you, but what are your tips on going from cold outreach to warm introductions? Do you have any tips for sending cold outreach that actually makes people feel compelled to respond there? And any of you can jump in.
Yeah, I think creativity has been really key. I used to do school hosted conferences almost like this one, and we can really pay any of our speakers. And I remember we were baking like 20 cakes a month just to send them to folks to have them speak at our school. And oddly enough, that's actually how I got my internship at Shopify as well. I was sending food baskets. But I think like just getting creative in a way where people are oftentimes getting emails, they're oftentimes getting LinkedIn messages, but not too often are they getting something physical. It doesn't have to be something that you're paying for by any means, but I think going that extra mile always comes through, or usually comes through for folks, is my 2 cents on this.
Awesome. Anything else? Oh, I saw you both come off mute, so I will let you duke it out.
I was just gonna add on. Sorry. I was just gonna add on the creativity is huge. We still talk about at Notion, someone sent over a pizza box, but in the pizza box was their resume, like they hand delivered it to the office. And we still talk about it to this day because it got all of us talking about it. They obviously got a recruiter call. So yeah, creativity is a huge one.
I love it. I'm gonna drop my address in the chat because I want both cake and pizza. So just that's why I unmuted myself. No, I love that. I think also showing that you've done research. I think when you reach a goal, sometimes you get very generic outreach. It's like, it just doesn't. You get so much, especially now. There's so much just spam email that like it can get lost. Whereas if someone has done research, they've spent a little bit of time. They've been like, hey, I read these 2 articles about X problem. I thought this was really fascinating. That extra mile, and it kind of, whether it's physically doing something like sending your resume in a pizza box, or it's really doing research about the company, the folks you're reaching out to. I think those things can really make you stand out and are kind of important to do, especially in this age where you get so much spam every day. So it's helpful to have things that make it stand out.
Yeah, that actually leads me to a question that came in for you, which was you mentioned a lot about meeting and connecting with people as you were kind of validating your idea for Axel and thinking through the actual problems that people are facing and all of the different communication that you have done in different settings. Do you have any advice for how you have left a lasting impression for the folks that you've met along the way?
This is going to be counterintuitive, but I feel like the less we talked about ourselves and myself, the bigger impression that we made. If we were like, hey, we're obsessed with you. No, that sounds great. Like, don't say that. We're obsessed with your problem and we want to know everything about your problem. I think the more that you make it about the other person, their challenges, their experiences, that's really compelling versus, everyone wants to talk a little bit about themselves. Of course, we want to talk about like what we are experiencing, all that, but the less that we did that was really great. If you center the person in the conversation and make it more about listening and what they're saying and reading between the lines versus talking a lot about what we have done or I think, and there are times we did that too because you were learning, and those conversations didn't go as well because people would be like, okay, cool, you just monologued about yourself for like 30 minutes and I didn't get to chat. So giving people the opportunity to talk about themselves and their problems and centering them versus yourself, I think is really helpful and important.
Yeah, that's a really good note, centering them in the conversation. And that leads me to a question for both you and for Zach, which is, are there any skills that you think are most overlooked but really important for first-time founders? It might be communication, it might be hard skills, soft skills. I'd love to hear from both of you on this one.
Yeah, I think for me, and maybe this is like a recency bias thing, but like recruiting is such a underrated skill in a sense. Um, as founders, you can only do so much when it comes to starting your business, and you know, you can work 24 hours. Sometimes that's not even enough. And having the right people join the company and be willing to be bought in for the vision for the company is so important. And I think, communicating that to folks, being, somewhat oriented when it comes to selling the company, but being genuine about that at the same time. Again, I just see that as such a underrated skill and something that has been super top of mind for me when it comes to the ability to recruit the right people for your company.
I love that so much. And I would have actually said that as like being able to sell the company, sell your, you're constantly doing that. But I think the other thing I'd focus on is I think being able to overcome challenges with like a very optimistic mindset, like grit, resilience, whatever you might call it, but being like, oh, well, that was a really bad day. And tomorrow I have to get back up and it's going to be a great day. And I'm going to make sure it's a great day. And a lot of things are out of your control in a startup. Startups are hard. There's a lot going on. There's a lot out of your control. I think having, it sounds so silly, but having a positive mindset that you actually genuinely believe that things will work out and being optimistic about it or being obsessed with the problem. So you almost have blinders on and like, I'm going to solve this problem no matter what. Even if I have down days or days that are, rough or whatever, I think that mindset is so underrated. So whatever you can do to develop that grit and that resilience and the ability to be optimistic, and that could look like meditating or whatever that you are doing in your life to take care of yourself, to have that optimistic mindset. I think that's really, really key in startups.
Thank you. And another thing that I know we mentioned a couple of times earlier is that agility and innovation. That's kind of an essential characteristic for somebody to thrive in a startup environment. Shivani, I'd like to start with you on this one, but I think it's relevant to everybody here. How do you foster a sense of innovation and agility within your team? I know you said you recruit quite a bit on the internship side. How is that something that you prioritize at Notion?
Yeah, that's a great question. Specifically to Notion, which is, I would say, like a really big factor for folks wanting to be a part of our team, is internships are based on the ability for our incoming interns and new grads to be able to ship something by themselves by the end of their internship, whether that's internally for infrastructure data, externally for more product focused, growth related. That agility and that innovation is seen throughout their internship because the goal, again, at the end of the day, is for them to be able to speak to the work that they've been doing. And I think that's just like a really big plus for a lot of folks on the market looking for internships, being able to talk about the work that they've done, that they can physically see making a difference to the product at the end of the day. And whether they want to come back to Notion or not, that's still something that's a huge plus that they can talk about for maybe when they're deciding to become a founder or wanting to work with someone else or go to a different company. So I would say that is at least the philosophy here at Notion.
Thank you. Zach, you mentioned installing TVs in the office and having to really like shift your areas of focus and be really agile based on the needs of the business. Do you have any tips for kind of fostering that within your startup environment?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of leading by influence rather than telling anyone to do anything. I think oftentimes when people see someone taking initiative or going the extra mile, it's contagious in a sense. And I think it's been something that's, kind of been taught to me early on by a few of my previous managers, where you really want to be able to lead by influence rather than, any sort of like fist on table type of thing. And I think people will respect that a lot more, and it'll be a lot more of a natural transition to other folks at the company, seeing someone go the extra mile and really motivating others at the company to do the same. So I think that'd be my advice.
Thank you. Maryam, anything that you would add there?
I would say just like in a small team or even in not great teams that are growing, good ideas come from everywhere. Some of the best ideas come from sometimes outside of the company. So I think having an and mentality, like oftentimes, when you're really executing, your heads down, someone has a great idea, your first instinct might be like, oh, well, we're like heads down, we're so busy, we don't have time for this. But having a mentality of like, this is improvement and this is a great idea. So like, let's hear more about this idea. And I think hearing ideas through as a team, validating each other's ideas, and of course, trying things out, and if they're not working, knowing when to pull the plug, like, okay, this is not working, but we tried it, or we validated it, what I talked about earlier, as scrappily as possible, validate things as quickly as you can. But I think this notion of just making sure that the best ideas in a company will come from all over, and a lot of the times they won't even come from inside the company, they'll come from outside the company, from your customers. And so having the mentality of listening and I would say not saying, well, no, we don't have the time for this, but like listening to ideas as they come.
Love that. Thank you. Okay, another question for you and for Zach. If you were launching your company again in 2025, what would you do differently, given that, you know, the market is interesting right now, I imagine? Any advice that you would give if you were to redo it in 2025?
I can go first. Well, we all kind of know electric vehicles, not the hottest topic in Q1 2025. No pun intended. But that said, I think it comes back to launching a business because you feel there's a true trend, like something that's happening, and you feel very, very resilient and like sure, as you've tested it as much as possible. So external factors obviously will play a big role, but you feel very confident that there's a problem to solve, that but being creative about it. So I wouldn't do anything differently. I think the approach of being agile and thinking through things, and as you hit roadblocks, figuring out very quickly what the next process is. So it's we kind of knew going in it wasn't going to be a very linear process. No startup is actually a linear process. But having that mentality of like, all right, we're gonna have to shift, gears, we're gonna have to move things around, change our positioning, et cetera, being open to that. I think I would just probably go in more confidently that's going to come, even more so than I'm now, but I don't think it would change anything about the company itself.
Thank you. Zach, anything you would do differently in 2025?
Yeah, I think with all the new technology that's come out in the year or two, without being like the resident AI head, but essentially just like I think you can do much more with technology than you could 2, 3 years ago, and products that you might have had to raise money to build nowadays can be prototyped just by 1 or 2 people. So really leveraging the technology around you and being able to get started earlier on, build more before you actually have to get into anything more capital intensive, being able to test faster. And I think the technology is just out there for everyone to use at this point. So really taking advantage of that.
Thanks so much. Okay, Shivani, I'm gonna do a couple of like quick hits, recruiter hot takes from your perspective. And I know that your mileage may vary based on which company you're applying to, et cetera. I want to caveat that for everybody in the audience. But we have questions about personal impact statements on resumes, cover letters, and cold outreach. So first, do resumes do they need a personal impact statement or a personal statement at the top?
Personally, no.
Okay.
I think you'll be able to get a lot of your information out through your like the impact in terms of like what you've been doing. The other like main piece of advice I would have is like breaking out your skills into a separate section. So like languages, frameworks, different tools that you're comfortable with, so that's also easily parsable.
Awesome. Similar, I feel like every recruiter I talk to has a different flavor of their feelings about it, but cover letters, first off, are they necessary in your perspective? And then if you say they are, do you prefer more personal language or more kind of professional language in a cover letter?
Yeah, so I think it's a yes or a no depending on the situation.
Yeah.
So for me, for internships, I would say in new grad positions for like engineering product design, I would say yes, only if you think there's something you weren't able to tell with your resume. If there's a certain like situation you've been in, if there's like a gap, if there's like you took X amount of years because you had to take a break, whatever it is, I think a cover letter is a great way to be able to tell that story, especially if that resume doesn't have the room for it. Um, and then two, to add on whether it should be
Mhm.
personal or professional. Honestly, I think I don't mind either. I think it just depends on how you are conveying whatever it is that's in your cover letter. So if it's giving me more context on the resume, maybe it could be professional. If you're giving me more context on just like your background, your interests, things that you've been up to, it could be more personal. Uh, So yeah, I think either way just gives me more insight into who you are as a person.
Thank you. Okay, and final one is about cold outreach. And I do think that Zach and Maryam, you might have insight here too, but we have a lot of folks who are asking, who do you actually reach out to when it comes to that cold outreach? Do you have any recommendations for the types of people that you would recommend sending that cold outreach to? You know, how do you think about the types of people that might be able to offer you valuable information there? And Shivani, I would love to start with you.
Yeah, definitely. I would say two people. So depending on like where you found the role that you're interested in applying for, or the company, narrowing it down to maybe a specific recruiter that you would know is like a biz recruiter or a tech recruiter recruiting for the role you're interested in, or the types of roles you would be interested in, or even like if you're able to find them, the hiring manager or someone from that team as well. Usually LinkedIn will map you back to the person that posted it or a specific team member like that is like adjacent to that role. So those are great places to start. LinkedIn emails and or if you're even able to find their emails. I have no idea how people have found my like spam personal email, but I get emails there. So I mean, it's great because I'm like, okay, this person has been doing their research. But yeah, I would say recruiter and or hiring manager, or even again, just like general team members of the team you're interested in.
Thank you. Zach, having sent 90 cold outreach emails in the past month, do you have any advice for who you kind of assess when you're sending that cold outreach?
Yeah, my hit rate's a bit variable, but I think when it comes to, if you're just trying to learn from someone, I think oftentimes just reaching out to folks at a company you that have the background in whatever you're trying to learn, right? But oftentimes, like that's not going to be a VP level or C-suite level person if you're trying to learn any like hard skill in a sense. So really understanding who you're reaching out to and really orienting on skills and expertise rather than purely a title. And then we kind of play this game internally as well, where it's almost like climbing the ladder in a sense, where sometimes it is starting a conversation with just someone at the company, knowing that you have a end goal of chatting with, I don't know, the CEO of company XYZ, and knowing that maybe sometimes the hit rate of going directly there isn't super high. But finding your path in by warm intros from people within the company might just be a better strategy overall. So almost getting creative in that sense as well. But I think genuinely having an interest as to who you're reaching out to so that you can have a genuine conversation. And either way, I think that'll just lead to more connections and more introductions through that first person.
Thank you. And Maryam, I have a question for you, and I know we're almost at time, so I'm hoping we can make space for this one because I think it's a really good one. It's from Tashrif, and it is, I demoed a working product to possible users, my friends, friends of friends, past classmates. My problem is that I haven't gotten any negative or constructive feedback. Maybe I've struck gold with my idea, but I'm really worried people are just being nice. How do you reconcile this when you're kind of validating your ideas?
That's such a good question. I would say it might be time to upgrade or change the folks you're asking about this idea. So there's two things you can do. One, I think you can change the line of questioning. So sometimes the way we ask questions from our peers, from our friends, from our family, they don't want to hurt our feelings. And so if the product is something, for example, that they could use in their daily lives, be like, would you pay $5 a week to use this product? And where's your credit card? If this is really going to solve your problem, let's kind of figure that out. So that you could get, and of course, that's a really important. There's actually a book I highly recommend everyone read. It's called The Mom Test. And so we can put that in the notes. But that's a really good way of line of questioning people in your life on the problem. I'll be honest, if I had talked to anybody in my life about Axel, they just wouldn't have any context about the problem. And so they would be like, that sounds like a very useful thing. But if you haven't been in the space, it's hard to know, especially because it's a more complex B2B space, that experience isn't there. So the second thing I would say is ask other people, try and cold reach out to people and say in the industry that you're kind of targeting, folks across the space, and be like, I'm working on this problem, would love to just kind of get your feedback. And in that line of questioning, ask almost like questions that are meant to challenge and not questions that are meant to validate and say, yeah, sure, this is a great idea, great job. So I think asking people that are not friends and family and peers might be the right approach as well. So change the line of questioning, but also change the audience.
Thank you so much. That's such solid advice. I cannot believe how quickly this time has flown. I feel like there are so many questions we didn't get to. I'm sorry to everybody who submitted a question that we weren't able to answer, but it is time for us to wrap up today. Some quick reminders before we go. Please take 30 seconds to fill out our feedback survey in the chat so that Handshake can continue to bring you more events like this in the future. I would also ask you to check out the links that we've shared in the chat. The Base 10 team really wants to hear from you. If you are a future founder and you have an idea and you are thinking about taking that leap, the Base 10 team wants to connect with you. So be sure to check them out if you ever decide to take that leap to become a founder yourself. And finally, we will be in your inboxes tomorrow. We will be sharing all of these resources. We will share this recording. So look out for that tomorrow morning. Until then, thank you all for being here. Thank you, Zach and Maryam and Shivani. Everybody in the audience, keep chasing your big ideas, and we will see you at the next Future Founders Fest. Until then, have a good one.